Welcome back. We have with us Dr. Usman Chohan, who is an advisor on economy. Thank you for being with us. Usman, we always like hearing your opinion on economy overall. In terms of now, isn't it, we have some good news as far as the positive indicators that we've seen, come out as far as, are they a source of encouragement for you and I, for everyone? How do you look at it?
First of all, thank you for having me on your show. It's always a great pleasure. Yes, there are some positive indicators that are worth talking about. There's three primarily that stand out. The first is that the remittances are increasing. It's a good indication of how inflows from abroad are coming to shore up our reserves at home. The second factor is an interest rate cut happened, which is good, although I believe a larger cut needs to happen and needs to happen fast. And the third is that we expect fuel prices to come down and therefore ease the burden on the consumer. So if you have at least three factors like this, you're already seeing a shift towards the better, which is worth talking about.
The government is adamant and resolved towards economic reforms. We've also seen, S.N. Iqbal Saab talk about this and the focus on socio-economic and judicial reforms which are going to be garnered and towards accelerating Pakistan's development, of course, and of course ensuring stability because it has its own effects overall. The kind of reforms that we're looking at on the agenda overall, how hopeful are you?
I believe that there has been a lot that has been put on the table in our negotiations with the IMF, and it has been a bitter pill to swallow because sweeping nature of reforms have been demanded. And therefore, I think that proceeding along that path of reforms is already happening, which is a very good thing. The pace at which it will happen will depend on the political space that the government feels it has, as well as how the public reacts. So far, the public deserves credit for being very patient given how difficult the scope and size of the reforms are. And the third is how the IMF also gauges the overall global economy. You see, because they expect us to keep interest rates at a high level. They have not given any indication that it should come down. But when our inflation has come down so much, it is 9% in the last indication, then we should have an interest rate that is 9% or 10% max. The real interest rate cannot be this large. And so my point to you in your question about reforms is that the pace is very important, but there will be exogenous factors determining how fast it can be done.
Usman, when we talk about reforms, there's a lot that the government is planning to in terms of doing away with what they feel are white elephants, doing away with what they feel, are a no-gainer as far as their own. We've also seen, a lot of government enterprises are concerned. We've also seen a lot of headway there. How do you look at this? How do you look at the pace of it? Are you positive with regard to this, and you think that it's going along at the right pace? Because it's certainly a very difficult thing for any government to do.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right that it's very difficult to do, and so you cannot imagine it happening in one fell swoop. However, I think a lot of the burden has been put on the federal government, where in fact the white elephants are across Pakistan, not in the federating units, and therefore the provinces have to take a greater share of responsibility in this. There was a lot of motivation in the previous months, a lot of rhetoric and a lot of positive movement and momentum towards change, but you will face resistance every step of the way. Now the thing is, as long as we can keep that momentum of reform, it can be executed in a timely manner. But it's not just the federation, it goes further down in the system that you have to make these important reforms, and there the pushback seems to be very vehement. Perhaps they have to get on board with this bigger picture now.
Usman, we are looking at, today we are looking at judicial constitutional amendments in the NA, judicial reforms, and with the government at this time, with the numbers that they have, for any kind of reform really, which requires, for example, agreement from all parties, is certainly a difficult task. It's certainly, you know, even with regard to economic reform, taking all parties on board and ensuring that they move forward with this is, you know, going to be difficult. But we are seeing the government forge ahead. We are seeing them move forward. We're also seeing the resolve there. How, you know, commendable do you think this is, and how the pace of it, again, when we talk about things like inflation and the way that they've come down, you yourself have mentioned, are we looking at a further downward trend?
Yes, there's two parts to your question. One is about the domestic element of it and the hindrances that are put up, whether by taking things to court and leaving them to hang there, or as the second part of your question, how does the exogenous environment, the global environment, shape up over the next few quarters? On the domestic front, it is true that it has been a very easy tactic by reticent agents to push things into the courts, whether it is trying to avoid a tax bill or something bigger, and then things deliberate and things drag on, and it's a very quick way to do that. So the judiciary has and will always have a very significant role in determining our economic growth. And I would argue that countries such as the United States were built by their courts. Their development was driven by the courts, not by their Congress and not by the executive. The same will happen here, where judicial performance will have a very strong impact, where judicial performance is both the fairness as well as the speed at which things are done. And so we typically don't think of the judiciary as an economic agent per se, but the importance of judiciary in economics is very, very significant. So in terms of encumbrances, certainly you can suspect that many people will try to drag things that are part of the reform agenda into the courts. Now, on the second part of your question about how the global economic environment is shaping up, in fact, there are very positive signs for emerging markets like ours. The reason is that the U.S. Federal Reserve, so the main agent determining monetary policy in the United States, has figured out that the economy can be brought to a soft landing, that they may avoid a recession and yet bring down the interest rates in a calm manner. Therefore, all other countries that have some relationship to the dollar are also adjusting their interest rates downward, also keeping in mind that inflation is coming down, which is what the Fed was looking at. Since we had such a good indication in the last month, we thought that maybe the state bank would be more proactive in reducing its rates. It went for a 2% cut, so from 19.5 to 17.5, which is still an astronomical number. But inflation is at 9%, so how can you have a positive 8% real interest rate, which means subtracting for inflation, and then expect business to do well? So what I'm saying is that business is expecting the environment to get better in Pakistan, and therefore it is poised to make investments and take things on, but it is waiting for a more decent interest rate to materialize. And I think the state bank is doing it too slowly. It's of course in the right direction, but given the drastic drop in inflation, it should be more drastic in its cuts for the monetary policy to drive business investment, especially because businesses have had a very hard time in the emerging markets overall since 2022, and so they're gunning for growth again, and we also have to start gunning for growth to drive further positive indicators, as we talked about.
You know, you meant the indicators also. Why is, you know, to use a, we'll be coming back after a short break, after which we'll talk more about the positive indicators in the economy. Please stay with us. Right, welcome back. Usman, I was about to ask you, there is, as far as the IMF is concerned, why do you think it's being so hard on us to you know, say it in layman's terms with the conditionalities at this time?
Well, whenever there's a problem with something, you can always attribute it to two factors. Either somebody is stupid or they're evil. And I don't think that the IMF is stupid. So there is probably something deeper that is going on. And this is not a conspiracy theory type position. This is in fact not even targeted at Pakistan per se. This is part of a broader austerity paradigm which the IMF has put in place in many, many countries to the severe detriment, but saying that it is evil is unfair, because the IMF is also fed up with certain countries, not just Pakistan, but certain countries continually coming to it for aid. As you know, we have gone 24 times to the IMF. So the IMF is saying, let's stop this affair once and for all and put in such deep and striking systemic reforms that you don't need to come to us anymore. The IMF benefits most from a diverse portfolio of recipients, and instead it is constantly engaged with a select number of them. And on the other side, Pakistan has gone to the IMF 24 times, and yet it still needs to go again. Sometimes you could understand that the global economy is very shaky, but sometimes you figure that we have to get our house in order too. So this is a very acrimonious and unpleasant.
Do you think it also has to do with overall, our geostrategic position and other factors that, invariably do influence IMF, and one can't rule them out really?
Yes, one cannot rule out geopolitics, global geopolitics in the economic sphere. You're absolutely right. But there is enough evidence on our domestic front alone as an explanatory factor. The geopolitics is certainly there, but the fact is that we were not prepared for the global crisis that happened after the pandemic. We did an excellent job during COVID, but the way the world has shifted, because we couldn't predict the war that took place in Eastern Europe or what is happening now in the Middle East. There's just so much volatility in the world that countries like ours get swept earlier than everybody else. So what I would like to do is to shore up our reserves, strengthen the structure of the federation and the provinces, drive business activity, increase the taxation breadth rather than depth, and promote renewable energy, invest in education, and have a resilient economy so that the next time this happens, it is cyclical and it will happen, maybe a decade, maybe 2 decades from now. When it happens, we are far more ready to deal with it. And so you have to think on a long term, and you should be ready by then to say goodbye to the IMF. And maybe the IMF, inshallah, hopefully is redundant for the rest of the world too, that no country needs to go to it ever.
Thank you so much, and on that positive note for being with us, Dr. Usman Chohan. Your take on economy is always welcome. Thank you for being with us. Overall, of course, we've seen the positive indicators. We've seen the inflation come down considerably. We've seen this. We've seen the stabilization as far as the dollar is concerned. And we've seen the bank interest rate by 200 basis points come down. We've also overall looking at more of this as far as Pakistan is concerned. Stability certainly seems to be on the horizon. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.